The wind howled at 40 degrees below zero, but inside the ranch house, warmth lived. Candlelight danced across copper braids as the 7-year-old girl led her visitor through rooms that smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke. Outside, Montana territory froze. Inside, life persisted against impossible odds. The child stopped at a closed door, placed one small hand against the wood, and whispered words that would unravel 3 years of history. "Meet my mommy." The door opened to reveal a woman in a rocking chair, 19 years old, exhausted but breathing, cradling a 3-week-old infant at her breast. The rancher who had followed the child recognized her immediately. She was the banker's daughter. The one everyone said had died in childbirth 6 months ago. The one whose father had hosted a memorial service in his new bank building. Yet here she sat, alive, nursing her baby in a house that should not exist, 20 miles from a town that had abandoned both of them to winter's judgment. The woman looked up, tears tracking down her weathered face. "He saved us." The one they laughed at. Time collapsed. The story reversed. Montana Territory, 3 years earlier, 1884. Samuel Frost was 34 years old, a bachelor rancher with methodical habits that his neighbors found peculiar. He read agricultural journals by lamplight, studied weather patterns with the intensity of a scholar, kept detailed notebooks in cramped handwriting that filled shelf after shelf. His knowledge came from inheritance. His father, dead now 5 years, had documented weather obsessively for 40 years. Page after page of temperatures, snowfall depths, wind speeds, dates when rivers froze and thawed. The data revealed patterns that most men could not see. Samuel saw them clearly. Catastrophic winters arrived every 18 to 20 years. The last one had struck in 1867, killing hundreds across the territory. His father had survived it, documented it, warned about it. Now Samuel held those notebooks in his calloused hands and performed calculations that made his stomach tighten with certainty. The next killing winter would arrive within 3 years. Perhaps sooner. He began building immediately. Underground rooms. Massive hay storage. Double-walled construction. His neighbors noticed. Questions turned to whispers. Whispers turned to open speculation. One afternoon, standing in the general store, Samuel made his mistake. He told the truth. A killing winter is coming. We have maybe 3 years. The warning spread through town like disease. One man heard it and laughed louder than all the others. Chester Vance was 42 years old, president of Gallatin Bank and Trust, and he wore his authority like his imported Chicago suits, with absolute confidence. His gold watch chain caught lamplight during meetings. His mahogany desk dominated the bank's interior. He was building something grand, a $47,000 expansion that would transform his bank into the finest building in Montana Territory. 2 stories. Ornate facade. Modern wood stoves. Single-pane windows that would flood the interior with natural light. When Chester heard about Samuel's warning, he called a town meeting. 73 people gathered in the church basement on a cold October evening. Samuel brought his father's notebooks, 40 years of careful documentation, and spread them across a table. He explained the patterns. Showed the calculations. Pointed to 1867 and the hundreds who died when preparation failed. Chester listened with theatrical patience, then produced his counterargument. An expert from the territorial capital, paid $200 to travel and testify, declared the pattern was coincidence. Modern times were different. Building techniques had improved. The territory was more civilized now. Samuel's father had been a fearful man, the expert said, and Samuel had inherited his weakness. Chester proposed a vote. Should Samuel Frost stop frightening decent people with grandmother's tales? The question was rhetorical. Chester's bank held mortgages on 60% of the businesses represented in that room. The vote passed 31 to 4. The gavel pounded. The crowd murmured approval. Chester rose to his full height and coined the phrase that would follow Samuel for 3 years. Frost's folly. That's what we'll call this madness. The room erupted in laughter. The phrase spread instantly, repeated with increasing cruelty. Chester offered Samuel $800 for his land, calling it charity for the disturbed. Samuel refused. The exile began immediately. Chester spread rumors with surgical precision. Samuel was mentally unstable. Dangerous to children. Potentially violent. The schoolteacher stopped inviting Samuel to town gatherings. The general store owner served him last, always last, after every other customer had been accommodated. In church, the congregation shifted away when Samuel sat down, leaving empty pews around him like a quarantine zone. For 6 months, isolation became Samuel's permanent condition. He stopped coming to town except for essential supplies, spoke to no one, endured stares that burned worse than winter wind. Chester's new bank opened with brass band and celebration. 300 people attended. Champagne flowed. The ornate facade gleamed in afternoon sunlight. Samuel watched from a distance, holding his father's worn notebooks against his chest, then turned his horse north. Behind him, the brass band played triumphant marches. Ahead, storm clouds gathered on distant mountains, and Samuel rode alone toward land everyone considered death sentence territory. The northern valley revealed itself gradually as Samuel rode. Natural windbreak on 3 sides. Protected approach. His father's notes had marked this exact location with a star symbol and words that Samuel had memorized. Water means life when everything freezes. Build here. He found the spring on his 3rd day exploring the land. It bubbled up from deep underground, never freezing, maintaining a constant 52 degrees even in the cruelest winters. Steam rose from its surface in cold air. Samuel knelt, cupped his hands, and drank water that tasted of minerals and promise. Construction began with the main house. Double walls filled with sawdust and clay for insulation. 3-foot-thick sod roof that would hold heat better than any conventional design. South-facing windows positioned to capture maximum sunlight during short winter days. The underground root cellar went 12 feet deep, its packed earth walls maintaining 45 degrees year-round without fire or artificial heat. Samuel cut and fitted each timber himself, tested each joint, accepted no compromise. The hay barn rose next. Capacity for 400 bales, enough to feed 20 cattle through a 6-month winter if necessary. Samuel cut ice blocks from the spring-fed pond, stored them in an underground ice house packed with sawdust that would keep them frozen through summer. He preserved food with methods his father had taught him. 80 quarts of vegetables sealed in jars. Smoked venison hanging in the cold room. Dried beans and salt pork stored in sealed containers. Stockpiled medicine filled one entire shelf. Whiskey, laudanum, bandages, sulfur powder. The emergency shelter attached to the main house through a covered walkway. Separate entrance. 4 beds. Small stove. It could house additional people if disaster struck. Samuel built it anyway, though he expected to remain alone. His father's journal contained one line that Samuel copied into his own notebook, pressing the pencil deep into paper until the words left indentations. Civilization is 3 meals from collapse. The prepared man saves more than himself. Samuel created backup systems for his backup systems. Snow melting apparatus in case the spring became inaccessible. Ventilation shafts that could be opened or sealed depending on wind direction. He tested everything. 1 quart of firewood heated the house for 48 hours at 20 degrees below zero. The root cellar maintained temperature within a 2-degree range regardless of surface conditions. By summer of 1886, the entire compound stood complete. Samuel sat on his porch one evening at sunset, looking south toward town 20 miles distant. Smoke rose from Chester's new bank building, and Samuel felt no anger, only certainty. He had done what his father taught him. While Samuel built his fortress of preparation, Chester built his monument to pride. In town, the mockery spread like infection. Frost's folly became the town's favorite joke. Children invented a rhyme that they sang while jumping rope. Samuel Frost knows winter's cost, but all his sense is lost. Adults repeated it. Laughed. The general store began selling postcards featuring crude drawings of a man building an igloo while the sun blazed overhead. Sales were brisk. Chester's bank expansion neared completion through the summer of 1886, growing more ornate with each passing month. The architect argued for coal heating. Wood stoves, he warned, could not heat a building of this size in extreme cold. Chester overruled him with absolute confidence. This is Montana territory, not the Arctic Circle. The huge single-pane windows concerned the architect as well. Beautiful, certainly, but they would bleed warmth in winter. Chester dismissed these calculations as fearful thinking. Beauty matters more than your fearful calculations. Natural warning signs began in the fall of 1886. Bird migration patterns shifted 6 weeks early. Elk descended from high country in September, their usual October migration compressed by instinct. Bears entered hibernation unusually early, as if fleeing something not yet arrived. Old-timers noticed these changes, mentioned them in saloons, and found themselves laughed at the way Samuel had been laughed at. October brought early snow that melted within days. Temperature dropped to 10 below zero, then rebounded to 40 degrees. People reassured each other this was normal variation. November arrived unseasonably warm. 50 degrees on Thanksgiving. Chester hosted a celebration in his new bank, raising champagne before 120 guests. To modern times and modern thinking. The crowd roared approval, toasted progress, and congratulated Chester on his vision. 20 miles north, Samuel completed final preparations. He filled every container with water. Stacked firewood to the ceiling. Brought all 6 cattle into the barn and secured every door. December 10th arrived with normal temperatures. 32 degrees at sunset. Ordinary. But an old rancher noticed something wrong. The wind had stopped completely. Not slowed. Stopped. The air hung motionless, and the sunset clouds carried a greenish tint that made his skin prickle with ancestral memory. Samuel's barometer dropped faster than he had ever witnessed. The needle fell like a stone thrown into deep water. Town celebrated Christmas with decorations and planning. Chester announced his bank would host a New Year's gala. 300 invitations went out. On December 31st, evening temperature held at 28 degrees. People arrived in party clothes, laughing, anticipating midnight champagne. At midnight, as Chester raised his glass to toast 1887, temperature outside dropped 40 degrees in 30 minutes. Nature's final warning became nature's judgment. January 1st, 1887. 12:47 in the morning. The wind exploded at 60 miles per hour. Temperature plummeted to 48 degrees below zero within 2 hours. Snow fell at 3 inches per hour, visibility dropped to arm's length, then to nothing. The town was catastrophically unprepared. Most families possessed 3 days of firewood, minimal food storage, no contingency planning. Chester's bank, filled with 120 people trapped by the storm's sudden violence, became an emergency shelter by necessity and a tomb by design. The $47,000 building could not maintain heat. Wood stoves designed for aesthetics proved inadequate for the volume they needed to warm. Huge windows that flooded the interior with beautiful daylight now bled warmth into the void. Within 6 hours, despite fires burning in every stove, interior temperature dropped to 35 degrees. People burned furniture to supplement the stoves. Not enough. The building's ornate beauty transformed into geometric cruelty. Doors froze shut from ice buildup. No one could evacuate safely. Outside temperature reached 52 below zero with wind chill approaching 85 below. Exposed skin froze in 90 seconds. January 2nd brought intensification. Storm winds increased to 70 miles per hour. Main Street disappeared under 8-foot drifts. Families in homes burned their final furniture, then doors, then floorboards. The store owner broke into his own shop, distributed food to desperate families. It ran out in 24 hours. People began dying. Cold claimed the elderly first, then the very young, then anyone too weak to maintain body heat through constant movement. 20 miles north, Samuel's compound existed in different reality. Underground temperature held steady at 45 degrees. Main house maintained 68 degrees with moderate fire. 6 cattle remained alive in the barn, producing milk. The root cellar held 80 quarts of vegetables, smoked meat, dried beans. The spring flowed at 52 degrees, unlimited water, impossibly warm against winter's fury. Samuel's daily routine continued unchanged. He tended animals, checked supplies, maintained fires, read his father's journals by lamplight. Outside his valley fortress, winds screamed at 70 miles per hour, but he heard it distantly, like something happening to a different world. He felt no fear. He was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what his father had taught him, and the preparation that had earned mockery now earned survival. By January 8th, the storm paused for 6 hours. Temperature rose to 30 below zero. In town, 17 people had died from cold and hunger. In Chester's Bank, someone finally remembered the man they mocked. Samuel's 8th day of storm began at 5:30 in the morning with familiar routine. Milk the cows. Check hay supply, 287 bales remaining, more than sufficient. Stoke fires. Prepare breakfast. Fresh eggs. Bread. Milk. Preserved peaches opened from a jar sealed last summer. He sat at his table and ate slowly, then opened his journal and wrote with careful precision. Father was right. Mockery is the cost of vision. Survival is its reward. The storm resumed that evening, January 8th, and continued 9 more days without mercy. Temperature dropped to 58 below zero on Samuel's thermometer, the lowest reading it could register. Total snowfall reached 14 feet in his protected valley, estimated 20 feet or more in exposed areas. In town, the death toll climbed. 32 confirmed dead by January 12th. Chester's Bank held 120 people who had been trapped for 12 days, now burning interior walls to feed fires that could not warm them. Frostbite amputations were performed without anesthetic. Children cried from hunger until they no longer had strength to cry. People chewed leather boots, melted snow with body heat to produce water they could drink. The schoolteacher's wife, delirious with cold and starvation, suddenly remembered something. She whispered to her husband through cracked, bleeding lips. Frost. He lives north. He prepared. Her husband dismissed the idea immediately. 20 miles in this? Suicide. But his wife insisted with the clarity of someone who had accepted death and found she was not ready. We're dying here. Someone must try. The blacksmith volunteered. Thomas Garrett, 38 years old, strong, experienced with winter travel. The decision was made on January 14th at dawn when temperature briefly rose to 35 below zero. The only chance they would get. Thomas took 2 horses, emergency supplies, a compass. Chester tried to stop him at the bank's frozen door. Don't waste yourself on Frost's folly. Thomas turned, frost already forming on his rapt face. Folly is dying in your monument to pride. The journey nearly killed him. Within 2 hours, exposed fingers began blackening from frostbite despite heavy gloves. 4 hours in, his first horse collapsed and died. Thomas continued on foot, leading the second horse, vision narrowing as hypothermia tightened its grip. 7 hours after departing, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he saw smoke rising from a valley ahead. He staggered the final mile and collapsed 50 yards from Samuel's door, one hand reaching toward warmth he could no longer feel. Samuel opened his door to retrieve firewood. In the snow, a man lay frozen, hand extended. Samuel ran. If you're finding value in stories about preparation, foresight, and wisdom proven true through consequence, consider subscribing. These narratives take significant research and careful construction to deliver the emotional journey you've experienced. Your support allows more stories like Samuel's to be told with the depth and respect they deserve. Samuel dragged Thomas inside and removed frozen clothing. The exhibition began at dawn on January 17th. Notes on cold weather treatment. Temperature held at 20 below zero. Temperature had dropped to 86 degrees. 93 survivors were able to walk. Blackened fingers. 24 remained 2 weeks. Samuel wrapped him in wool blankets and placed him near the stove. Samuel arrived with sleds pulled by his father's notes carrying supplies for those who had to stay. Fast warming promising to return when the storm ended. Slow warming saves. The journey north took 3 tiny sips. Samuel led the convoy slowly, handle stopping frequently, sharing food 2 hours of piles he had prepared for exactly this temperature rising degree by careful Children were wrapped in blankets from the storage. 92 degrees, consciousness elderly were carried on sleds. Thomas's first words emerged left as broken with travel. The first group reached Samuel's compound on January 19th. Samuel's response was immediate. Shelter became family housing. How many remain alive? Main house transformed into a hospital. The barn was converted to a dining hall with long tables, hot meals, milk for children. Thomas could not finish the sentence. Spring water his flowed eyes unlimited, gradually, the first clean water anyone had tasted in sanctuary surrounding him. Somewhere in those first hours, someone was stacked in the Frost's folly, with lingering walls lined with preserved food to break old habits. A child nearby responded despite innocent 58 degrees below zero outside Frost's fortress. Warmth maintained at 68 degrees with a moderate fire that consumed wood at sustainable rates. By January 21st, fresh milk everyone used it. Eggs in a basket. Fortress. Bread cooling on the counter. That should not exist but did. Thomas wept. The sanctuary not built by the mocked man, powered by his devastating contrast between validated life separated by 20 miles. Samuel organized rationing, medical care, while we burned our souls to stay alive. People deferred to his knowledge. Samuel treated Thomas's frostbite using methods from his father's journals. He taught them weather wisdom, preparation methods, clean bandages, the patterns his father had documented, gentle handling of tissue that would either recover or die, completely. No middle ground. The storm finally broke on January 28, but survived. 1887. By evening, 28 days of sustained violence. Venison temperature rose to 15 degrees. Preserved sun appeared for the first time in 4 weeks. His first real meal in 13 days. He described conditions in the bank while exposed areas without interruption. 11 feet in Samuel's protected valley. People eating wallpaper paste. The town survey revealed 127 dead from cold, starvation, children silent from hunger. Chester's bank dying with structural damage from interior Chester maintained Windows authority while people froze around reduced to frozen still giving orders, still believing in his expertise. Survivors gathered in Samuel made a simple statement. Chester Vance stood before 93 Tell people me how to reach the bank. Killed through pride and ignorance. Thomas stared at him, confused. His expensive suits were gone. They mocked you for warmth. Exiled his gold watch chain had been traded for food that never came. Why would you help them? He looked diminished. Samuel's answer came from his father's philosophy had compressed him into something closer to his journal and lived by for 3 years. His confession emerged in broken sentences. Because my father taught me, the prepared man saves more than himself building a monument to my pride. They formed a plan. You spent your father's wisdom building survival. Bring supplies. I called you mad. Guide survivors to the compound. I was Samuel wrong about capacity for 20 people indefinitely. Everything I thought I knew. Shorter duration. He stopped. On January 16th, temperature rose to 15 below zero. Of all performance, he asked the only question that mattered. Thomas rode Samuel's horse back to town carrying food and a message that would transform mockery into salvation. How to prepare. Frost's folly Samuel's response was characteristically simple. Thomas reached the bank at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on January 16th. Spring came late spread through the frozen building like warmth itself. But when it arrived, it revealed a transformed community and a man who had earned immortality through preparation. Initial disbelief gave way to Samuel's story to this moment. Unwrapped a package of bread and dried meat from vindication and wisdom showed his frostbite your subscription helps ensure more stories receive the research, the evidence was irrefutable. The madman had saved himself and could save them. Their careful reconstructions of moments when reality judged character and preparation determined survival. Survivors rebuilt the town through spring and summer of 1887 according to new principles. Every structure required emergency heating capacity, food storage, water access. Double-wall construction became mandatory. Insulation was no longer optional luxury but survival necessity. Each family built a root cellar minimum 10 feet deep. The town created communal storage facilities. 5,000 pounds of grain. 2,000 pounds of dried meat. Preparation replaced complacency in every aspect of construction and planning. Frost's Fortress became the official name for Samuel's compound. The town voted to rename Main Street Frost Avenue. The general store displayed a new sign in its rebuilt interior. In preparation we trust, EST 1887. News traveled through Montana Territory at the speed of survival instinct. 13 nearby towns sent representatives to learn Samuel's methods. He taught freely. Weather pattern recognition. Preservation techniques. Construction principles that prioritized survival over aesthetics. He distributed copies of his father's 40 years of weather documentation. By 1890, 23 settlements had adopted Frost principles for emergency preparedness. In February of 1889, a pregnant woman arrived at Frost's fortress seeking shelter during another harsh winter. Her name was Margaret. 17 years old. Abandoned by her family when pregnancy became visible. Her father was Chester Vance, who had rejected her to maintain his carefully reconstructed reputation. Samuel provided sanctuary without judgment. She gave birth in January of 1890. A daughter named Catherine. Copper-braided. Healthy. But Margaret never fully recovered from the difficult birth. Fever claimed her in October of that year, and Samuel adopted Catherine, raised her as his daughter, taught her everything his father had taught him. 3 years later, the opening scene of this story occurred. Another pregnant woman. Another blizzard. Another life saved because one man had prepared when everyone else mocked him. Samuel founded a school in 1895. Preparation and Survival Sciences. Students aged 10 to 18 learned weather patterns, food preservation, emergency medicine. Catherine attended, became his teaching assistant by age 12, carried forward the wisdom that had saved 93 lives and transformed an entire territory's approach to survival. In 1899, Samuel published his father's journals as a book. 40 Years of Montana Weather, A Legacy of Preparedness. It became required reading in territorial schools. Samuel died on November 17, 1904, age 54, from pneumonia that his weakened body could not overcome. He died in the home he had built, surrounded by Catherine, now 24, and her children. His final words to her carried the philosophy that had defined 3 generations. Your grandfather saw patterns. I confirmed them. You'll teach the next generation. That's how wisdom survives. They buried him in the valley where mockery became honor, where folly became fortress, where one man's vision saved 93 souls and changed a territory's understanding of preparation. 340 people attended Samuel's funeral on November 20, 1904. Temperature was 15 degrees below zero, appropriate weather for a man defined by winter. Catherine stood at the graveside and read from her grandfather's journal, the line that had guided 3 generations. Civilization is 3 meals from collapse. The prepared man saves more than himself. Chester Vance spoke next. 60 years old now, humbled by 17 years of living with the knowledge that pride had nearly killed him. He saved my life. Saved my soul. I spent $47,000 learning I knew nothing. In December of 1904, the territorial governor approved a name change. Gallatin Crossing became Frostburg, Montana Territory. Frost's fortress was maintained as both historical site and functional emergency shelter. The original spring still flowed at 52 degrees. Underground chambers remained intact. The root cellar preserved artifacts. Original journals. Samuel's tools. Even some of the first hay bales stored, kept as reminder of preparation's power. Every January 1st became Survival Day. The town gathered at the fortress. They lit 127 candles for the dead. One eternal flame for Samuel. Children recited words that had become community creed. Preparation over pride. Knowledge over mockery. Life over comfort. The ceremony included practical elements. Testing emergency supplies. Practicing evacuation routes. Reading weather signs. Remembering that survival was not accident but choice. By 1920, Frostburg's population reached 2,400. 0 winter deaths since 1887. The town became a regional supply hub, known for quality preserved foods and emergency preparedness consultation. In 1925, another major winter storm struck Montana. Temperature dropped to 62 below zero, the worst since 1887. Frostburg recorded 0 casualties. Surplus supplies were shared with unprepared neighboring towns, saving lives across the region. The story returns to its beginning. 1887, the night when a 7-year-old girl with copper braids led a visitor through a warm house during a blizzard. "Meet my mommy," she whispered. The woman in the rocking chair, nursing her infant, alive because mockery had transformed into preparation, and preparation had transformed into sanctuary. In town, Chester's $47,000 bank stood damaged. Windows broken. Interior burned. A monument to pride that became a tomb. 20 miles north, Samuel's fortress glowed with warmth. Spring flowed eternal. Lives continued. The mocked man built sanctuary. The proud man built monument. Nature judged which man understood survival. Mockery made him invisible, catastrophe made him immortal.